This video is sponsored by the all-new Red Magic 9 Pro Gaming phone. If you play games on your phone regularly, this is basically the best phone you can get for that purpose. I know that sounds a little hard to believe, but if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll show you why. Alternatively, you can click the link below to check it out for yourself right now. Recently, IGN hosted an interview with the legendary Yoko Taro, creator of the Nier series, and Hwang-Tai Kim, the director for Stellar Blade. This was an important meeting for two reasons. Firstly, it was a chance for Kim to meet his idol. Kim had spoken in no uncertain terms about how much the Nier series means to him, and he specifically said that when he played Nier Automata, he realized what kind of game he wanted to one day make. The other reason that this meeting was important is because in this interview, Yoko Taro said that Stellar Blade was a better game than Nier Automata. Quote, Stellar Blade is a really amazing game. I'd say that it's much better than Nier Automata, end quote. Kim had his own praise for Taro, saying, quote, Nier Automata has such a strong and unique flavor to it. The more we talk about it, I keep feeling that Stellar Blade can't compete, end quote. Taro did not agree, responding, quote, I wouldn't say that. Stellar Blade actually makes me quite jealous. It's a game with a great concept and amazing graphics. The product shows how you and your studio staff were working on it very hard together, end quote. So I bring this to you at the top of this review because I think understanding the reverence that Kim has for Nier Automata is central to understanding Stellar Blade, because ultimately, I do believe that despite the protestations of Yoko Taro, Stellar Blade is a game that lives in Nier Automata's shadow. But I can understand why Yoko Taro might say that Stellar Blade is a better video game, because Stellar Blade has many of the things that Nier Automata lacked. It has far better visuals, something Nier Automata was criticized for when it released back in 2017. Depending on your taste, you might say it has better combat, both during regular world exploration, but in particular during boss battles. It has better open world design, better exploration, better progression and customization, and a better rewards economy. Hold these two games up to the light, and you may come to the same conclusion that Yoko Taro did. Stellar Blade is a better video game. But it just isn't so, because for the many things that Stellar Blade gets right, there is just something missing from the core of this that makes Stellar Blade feel hollow and vapid. Much of it comes from how relentlessly Stellar Blade attempts to ape Nier Automata, from the main character to the setting, to the story, to the soundtrack, to so much more. Major story moments, themes, and reveals feel like they were cribbed straight from Nier Automata. And you might say, what's wrong with that? Isn't that loving homage? Or couldn't we classify Stellar Blade as a sort of spiritual successor? Well, you could if the spirit of these two games was remotely the same, but they couldn't be more different. Nier Automata was beautiful and gut-wrenching and thought-provoking and moving. Every part of it felt so human despite its mechanized aesthetics. Stellar Blade, on the other hand, feels entirely synthetic. Art design that looks flashy but never feels cohesive, lifeless characters, wooden voice work, and a story that is a mix of incomprehensible and forgettable, with far too many of its major beats lifted from Nier Automata. Stellar Blade adopts the adornments of Nier Automata without fully understanding what made them so affecting. I would kind of liken it to Atomic Heart, which was clearly inspired by BioShock, but without the narrative, thematic, or visual potency that made BioShock so memorable. The difference, though, is that Atomic Heart had a lot of design problems that Stellar Blade doesn't suffer from, and like I said earlier in this introduction, Stellar Blade gets a hell of a lot of stuff right. I did end up enjoying this game, and that's why I'm recommending it to you, but it does take a while for Stellar Blade to really hit its stride, and I would argue that this game really only comes together in the last 5 or so hours of its 25 to 30 hour runtime, when a final boss run gauntlet showcases just how great Stellar Blade's combat and boss design can be. In that final stretch, you're given a vision of what Stellar Blade could have been if it wasn't so focused on aping Nier Automata. This is a solid game made by a talented development team, but the impact of Stellar Blade is profoundly hamstrung by the reverence that this team has for the work that inspired it.
Double breath. Eve, are you ready?
Stellar Blade is the story of Eve. She's on a mission from Mother Sphere, a deity-like entity that has tasked her and her kind with the protection of the human race. During her launch, she crash lands and her companion is cut down by an Alpha Natiba, one of the monstrous entities that threaten humanity's existence. Rescued by the even-keeled Adam, Eve eventually makes her way to one of the few remaining human settlements, Zion, where she meets Lily, a chipper mechanic who is only too happy to help in any way she can. Zion is on the brink of collapse and in desperate need of hypercell cores that can sustain the city and its denizens denizens. Thus, even her buddies set out towards a variety of locations to bring these cells back, restore power to the city, all while eliminating the alpha natives, which were Eve's original mission objective. All of this is of course a setup for a much grander story full of misdirection and intrigue that explores why the world is ruined the way that it is, and the true motivations of this mother sphere, and the nature of what it means to be human, and the identity of the alpha natives you're tasked with culling, and ultimately Eve's place within all of this as someone tasked with a mission to protect humanity. I suspect that there will be two sets of reactions to Stellar Blade's story. Anyone who hasn't played Nier Automata is going to be like, this sucks. Because it does. It's not good, it telegraphs itself way too much, the reveals aren't at all interesting, and it tries to play itself off as deeper and more dramatic than it actually is. For most people, they're just going to be like, oh well, bad story, easy to ignore when the combat is this good, whatever. Totally fair reaction, by the way. If you have played Nier Automata, as I have, then I suspect you may have a different reaction to this story, because far too much of it feels far too close to Nier Automata's story. I'm not going to go into specifics because I don't want to spoil anything, but there were enough similarities that I found it deeply distracting because I felt like I was experiencing a worse version of something that I had already experienced. Separate from all of the comparisons, the narrative and character side of Stellar Blade is a total mess, easily the weakest part of the entire experience. Eve has received a lot of attention for her character design, with people suggesting that her design is overly sexualized, and I'll be real with you, I don't care that she's sexualized any more than I care about Buff Abby in The Last of Us. Both things can exist and both things are fine. What I care about is this a good, well-written character? And Eve is not a good, well-written character. She is just so vapid. She has no emotional range. She never says anything interesting. Events seem to wash over her without her seeming to process them in a way that feels believable. She goes out of her way to help people in Zion for side quests, but even the most emotive of quest lines fails to rouse anything resembling emotion in her. Sexy does not mean devoid of personality. Bayonetta is basically sex personified, and no one on the planet would dare say she's lacking in personality. More pointedly, 2B from Nier Automata defends humanity while wearing thigh highs and a thong, but she's complex. She fronts as this uncaring cyborg because her programming prohibits feelings, but she still feels things, and these emotions mean all the more for how forbidden they are. She's literally bursting with a humanity that she's not supposed to possess, and for that reason she feels like a very real character. Eve does not. She's totally hollow, so incredibly lifeless and flat for the entire game's duration, and given that she is the window through which you view this entire world, the world itself seems equally lifeless.
This city, it's so quiet and so lonesome.
Well, that's what happens when a city becomes devoid of humanity.
The exact same thing could be said of the game's other main character, Adam. In fact, it's worse with him, as his voice work is just so cold and distant. He's like an AI voice assistant more than an actual person. These two spend so much time speaking to each other, but it never comes close to feeling like they have any actual emotional connection.
Well, there are still some issues with the tetrapod steering system, so I'm afraid we're not able to leave.
Then when will you be ready?
Unfortunately, it's going to take longer than a day.
Then I'll go ahead on foot.
Things are a little bit different with Lily, who feels really out of place in this game because she feels like an actual person. She has a personality and emotions, and she questions things and is confused by things, and she actually feels real. Later in the game, she plays a more central role, and it's no coincidence that that's the best part of the game, in large part because of the fantastic boss encounters, but it doesn't hurt that Lily is there to provide a human reaction to the things that are transpiring, because you can't rely on the rest of the cast to do that. This overall feeling of lifelessness is pervasive across the game. Other NPCs you meet in Zion, even when they're trying to present as real, they don't. Like, this is me meeting the town hairdresser.
I'm Kasim, the hairstylist.
Hair.
I style your hair so you feel better and confident. Your hair looks great. It's full of potential. But that potential is hidden at the moment. That's why I said it is dull.
Is that so? Are you saying you can make my hair less dull?
At this point, he sends me on a fetch quest to collect his hairdryer, his hair straightener, and his scissors from a junk pile out in the open world. But do you see what I mean? Like, does this guy look like a hairdresser to you? Does his voice actor sound like it matches the character you see in game? And even setting aside how weird this is, it's also just kind of boring. You took an interaction that could have been interesting and full of character and just made it really dull. You might think I'm cherry picking this example, but it's not the only one. Here's another. This is me meeting a little balloon droid that I just rescued out in the wild.
What happened to you? Drones like you aren't supposed to work this way.
Hello, Eve. I am Digger. I have innumerable thoughts concerning my existence, and I am capable of making fantastic plans.
I told you this would be fun. You see what I mean?
See how they clearly meant this interaction to be funny, a little quirky, but it's just not, because all the life is sucked out of this scene because of how vacant all of these characters are. These two scenes really are the perfect encapsulation of what this entire story and world feels like. It's full of all this unique looking stuff that should have vastly more personality and presence than it actually does. The game is also reaching for a number of themes which are again kind of a copy and paste from Nier Automata. Not all of them, but certainly enough of them that I can't really talk about them without spoiling things, but yeah, the side quests that gesture towards grander themes still fumble the execution, and the smaller side stories the game tells are no less messy than the main story. Shift Up really painted themselves into a corner here. If storytelling is not your strength, then recognize that and tell a simple story that has fewer tripwires. If you can't properly grapple with futurist, humanist, or philosophical themes, then don't try to engage with them. Shift Up didn't know or recognize their limits here, and they bit off well and truly more than they could chew with the type of story that they wanted to tell. But they made an even more egregious mistake in their attempts to riff on Nier Automata's story and themes. Because now, not only am I experiencing a bad story, but I'm constantly being reminded of a better one. Coupled with the terrible characterization of both the main and side characters, and it's a damn good thing that Stellar Blade plays as well as it does, because you certainly aren't going to be playing this one for the story.
Looks like I used to work here. Let's take a look.
As much as Stellar Blade cribs the story and themes of Nier Automata, it does the same thing to the setting and world design too, though to be fair, there are very big differences in how playable these world spaces are, and there's certainly an improvement here in Stellar Blade. So yeah, Stellar Blade is set on Earth in the very distant future after a cataclysm of unknown origins wipes out most of the human race. What's left is essentially ruins infested with natives, as well as a handful of settlement spaces where a cybernetically enhanced form of humanity try to scratch out an existence. There are two types of space in Stellar Blade. There's your linear missions, which are set in sewers and subways and scientific facilities, etc. And then there are your open world areas. There are two of these open world areas, and both of them are big, wide open deserts punctuated by various points of interest, mainly ruins or scrap heaps. These open world spaces aren't much to look at. They're simple and bare bones next to how visually intricate the rest of the game often looks, and that simplicity was a very good choice. Stellar Blade can feel a bit visually discombobulating at times, between the cyborg NPCs and the weird fucked up tentacle-faced monsters and the high-tech weapons research facilities you're exploring. Seeing a big empty desert roll out before you, it's very real and organic in a game that often struggles to feel real and organic. It also helps that these open world spaces are actually quite pleasant and rewarding to explore, so you'll get side quests from NPCs in Zion to go out to one of these open world areas and do a thing. These side quests are pretty basic, like go and find my hairdryer, or please find out what happened to my son, etc. Nothing special. But when you get out to the spot where you need to complete the objective, it's almost always interesting. It usually involves some block puzzle, or some platforming, or some climbing, or finding 3 terminals so you can activate the main terminal, or time challenges where you press a button and have to shoot targets in quick succession, or quickly run over to a spot while dodging deadly turret fire. Oddly enough, I can only think of 2 quests in the whole game which were like kill X number of enemies for a reward. The narrative setups and payoffs for each of these activities is really weak, but the act of completing them is often surprisingly enjoyable, given how much work Shift Up has put into designing novel activities. And that's just the side quest stuff, where there's actually a whole bunch of stuff to find out in these deserts that isn't a side quest. It's just a fun little hidden chest or a collectible or whatever. You just wander around and scan the environment to see something tucked away out of reach, and then you go about seeing how to reach it. It seems like a simple loop, and it is, but again, because Shift Up are constantly pretty inventive with how they've designed these little puzzle challenges, it never really gets old. I did almost all of the side content on offer, maxed out every possible upgrade. That meant my playthrough took a total of around 30 hours, and I never really got bored of heading out into these 2 open world areas to see what I might find, and I was equally happy to return to them after major story arcs to mop things up I'd missed. All of this is totally optional, by the way, and if you want to completely avoid all of this stuff, you can, but I would advise against that, because I think that this open world stuff is actually some of Stellar Blade's best content. I don't want to oversell it, but it's good, especially given that it doesn't wear out its welcome. One of the reasons that this works as well as it does is because Stellar Blade has a surprising number of gameplay systems it can lean on to keep gameplay feeling diverse. This is not just a character action game, but nor does it make hard pivots into other genres the way that Nier Automata did. Stellar Blade never suddenly becomes a shmup or a bullet hell game, rather its diversity comes from systems that feel far more core to the overall gameplay loop. Climbing is a big one. You'll spend a lot of time looking for yellow paint so you know which surfaces to climb on, which people really hate these days, but I don't really care, to be honest. You want me to climb a thing, I'll climb it, and the less time I need to look for barely visible handholds, the better. Platforming is another big focus. You will often have to jump from place to place. The controls can get a little funky, but they work overall. There's also swinging from either bars or ropes, and you can mix things up with dashes and double jumps. There's wall running as well, because why not? Many of these things open up bit by bit, which gives Stellar Blade a sort of Metroidvania feel, particularly as you can return to some of the previous areas you visited to complete challenges that were previously impossible. The best example of Stellar Blade's gameplay range comes in the form of 2 missions which actually become survival horror shooters. But again, not because the game has suddenly shifted perspective or employed some gimmick, it's because the core gameplay loop is broad enough to withstand a shift like that. Eve's turret that follows her around, scanning environments and giving her advice, it also doubles as a gun that she instantaneously mounts on her wrist whenever she wants to fire. So there are 2 sections in the game where your sword is disabled and you have to rely on this turret gun, and there are all new enemy types that are introduced who are weak to gunfire because they have plenty of weak spots, and it's all really dark and claustrophobic, and it's full of jump scares, and it has these scripted sequences where you need to shoot waves of enemies while trying to survive. It's cool, man, it really is. Both times when I finished these sections, I was like, damn man, that is some good game design right there, because it's very rare for a game to be able to deliver you a totally different experience while staying within the constraints of its existing gameplay mechanics. It speaks to a broader point about how well made Stellar Blade is across many of its components. Visually, I personally don't like the art design. I think it really lacks visual cohesion, but technically it's very sound, and when the art direction does hit right, Stellar Blade can look fucking awesome. It also runs really well. I only had some minor frame stutters here or there, but other than that, no bugs, no crashes. In terms of polish, it's absolutely all there. It's also been thoroughly playtested, and so much convenience has been brought to bear without the game feeling like it's slippery and over-designed. Respawn spots are never far from a place you're likely to die a lot. The progression economy is generous with how much it doles out vital upgrades, while also leaving that little bit extra for you to work towards. You can change all of your gear on the fly whenever you like. You can get upgrades that help with sustain so you can stay longer in the field, or upgrades for your drone that help you find collectibles more easily. Death is pretty painless in that it never costs you any resources, and in fact you get to keep your ability charges, meaning that when you re-enter combat the next time, you have a bit of an advantage going into it. Coupled with an easy mode for those inclined and a hard mode that opens up after the first completion, Stellar Blade has been very thoughtfully designed to never irritate the player, but it never makes things so convenient that it feels like the game is playing itself. It's a really nice balance that demonstrates that Shift Up know what they're doing, but the absolute best showcase for that point is the combat. Pretty much every review has praised Stellar Blade for its combat, and you know what? They're spot on. This combat rules, but it does take some time for this combat model to really open up, and it only fully hits its stride in the final stretch of the game, where some exceptional boss design really showcases just how great this combat can be. It starts fairly simple, a light attack and a heavy attack with different combos allowing you to seamlessly weave those attacks together. There's a dodge, which does dodge things, and most importantly, there's a block button which doubles as a parry when you time it correctly. With these basics in place, what you start to notice almost immediately is how much flexibility Stellar Blade gives you to play how you want to play. It's perfectly viable for you to use only light attacks because there's combos for that, and the shorter animation windows are safer. You can also exclusively use heavy attacks, and that works too so long as you're willing to risk being more exposed due to the longer animations associated with each attack. If you'd like to just dodge everything, you can do that. And similarly, if you'd like to be really aggressive and parry everything, you can do that too. Obviously, the game intends for you to make smart use of everything on the table, but it's not forcing you into a specific playstyle the way that something like Sekiro does. But it is inviting that parry style of play in two important ways. Number one, your abilities charge much more quickly when you parry, and enemies have a stagger meter that depletes more quickly when you parry them, so you're incentivized to parry. But the other thing is that enemy animations and swing timers are extremely readable, giving you the confidence to parry based on what you see rather than having to rely on your memory alone. What I mean by that is that many games like this will deliberately mess with animations and swing timers such that an enemy will hold a wind up a second or two longer than you might expect them to, because that makes parrying their attacks harder, and so that means that you'll get hit and die a lot while you try to memorize these timings. I get why this is necessary because it does alter the pacing of combat in ways that keeps it challenging and diverse, but I do feel as though many games lean into this too much, and I feel like I spend more time trying to memorize and recall swing timers than actually responding dynamically to what I see the enemy is doing. Stellar Blade definitely has some of this memory-based parrying timing stuff going on, absolutely. But more often, it's relying on animations and swing timers that are reasonable and that make sense, and when the enemy draws their arm back to take a swing, they then swing when you would reasonably expect them to. I love that, I really did. I think it makes the parry-based combat more inviting and more satisfying because it feels like I'm actually interfacing with an enemy rather than just dying to their mercurial swing animations until I eventually memorize them enough. It does make combat easier, and I would say playing on normal difficulty, Stellar Blade is a pretty easy game for anyone who's played their fair share of melee action titles or Souls-likes, but this approach to the rhythm of combat is an absolute winner and one of Shift Up's smartest decisions. So all that stuff that I just spoke about, those are just the basics, and combat really does open up a lot more after that. It's driven by the skill tree. Killing enemies and completing quests will give you skill points which you can then use to unlock new abilities or augment your existing abilities, so your dodge can become a double dodge, and it becomes easier to execute a perfect dodge, which gives you a witch time slowdown thing, and you can also make it easier to perform perfect parries. Crucially, new offensive abilities open up after you perform a dodge or a parry, allowing you to counter-attack and maintain momentum. By far and away, the coolest thing you unlock is this phase shift that you can execute when enemies are about to perform an unblockable attack. You press forward and circle when your weapon flashes, and you'll teleport behind the target, allowing you to follow up with a hard-hitting counter. The majority of your damage won't come from basic attacks though, but rather from abilities that charge up whenever you do anything, but charge faster when you keep the pressure on an enemy. There are AoE focused abilities when you're fighting out in the wild, but during boss encounters, you're definitely going to be more focused on the ones that deal strong single target damage. There are only a few of these abilities, but between parry, dodging, phasing, regular attacks, and the odd bit of range combat, there's more than enough within the combat framework to make it feel robust and to stave off any feelings of boredom or repetition that may creep in. It also helps that there's plenty of enemy diversity, and that remains constant throughout your entire playthrough. In every new zone you'll face new foes, and they aren't just reskins or whatever, they're entirely new enemies with new attacks and movesets and weaknesses and all of it. And once you're introduced to them, they're then combined with other enemy types, and the whole combat chess thing kicks in, which is able to deliver unique feeling encounters every time. By the end, there's a really expansive bestiary to square off against, but Shift Up are never just throwing endless scores of enemies at you in order to overwhelm you. They're much more deliberate with how they get difficulty to scale over time, and it definitely works. So combat starts pretty limited, but it certainly opens up as the game goes on, owing to new abilities unlocked and new foes met. But I cannot stress enough just how important the final boss rush is in showcasing the potential of this combat. I'm not going to show you any of it here because I don't want to spoil it, but the last 5-ish hours of this game is essentially a boss rush with 4 marquee encounters that are so spectacular to behold and so well designed that this is when Stellar Blade finally clicked for me. In this last stretch, Stellar Blade finds the identity that it was to this point unable to grasp. When Stellar Blade is trying to be Nier Automata, it sucks, but when it remains focused on its excellent combat and boss design, Stellar Blade is its own unique experience, because this isn't Devil May Cry or Bayonetta, and nor is it Dark Souls or Sekiro, and nor is it God of War. It sits squarely between those different combat models, borrowing the best parts of each of them to arrive at something that feels distinct, something that is challenging but accessible, fast but well paced, rewarding aggressive play without demanding it. Stellar Blade's combat is its standout feature, and it's a true shame that this excellent and unique combat model sits within a game that feels like a fawning fangirl hoping to catch the attention of something greater. In Nier Automata, there is a location called the Copied City. It's made of crystallized silicon and carbon, and it was built by one of the game's antagonists, Adam, as a means of understanding humans more. The game doesn't really delve into the lore of this place very deeply, but it's interesting that this machine builds this thing with streets and buildings and power boxes and staircases and all the things that a city should have, but there's no color, there's no people, there's no life. The copied city adopts the form of a city without understanding what a city really is. Looking at the broader critical reception to Stellar Blade, it's clear that I have an outsized reaction to the way that it is looking to emulate Nier Automata. Most other reviews recognize that Nier is obviously a major source of inspiration for this, but they seem unbothered by how much of an inspiration it is. For me, it's too much, and it feels like Shift Up was so focused on recreating the vibes of Nier Automata that they forgot to create vibes of their own. Like the soundtrack, we haven't even spoken about that yet, but it is very, very Nier Automata. And that is not surprising because Shift Up actually engaged one of Nier's composers, Keiichi Okabe, and they worked with his production studio to deliver roughly 40% of the music in this game. And it's not an evolution of the Nier sound either. It's the same soundscape again, at least when it comes to the more dreamy background tracks. There is plenty of music in this game that does sound unique, but yeah, there is like 40% of it where if you close your eyes, you would absolutely swear you're listening to the Nier OST. Obviously, the main character is a sexy girl with a sword, followed around by a drone that talks to her, scans the environment, and can be used to shoot things. The world often looks like the world of Nier Automata, barren spaces punctuated by ruins, plenty of industrial settings. The story is strikingly similar in major aspects, as are the themes it looks to awkwardly explore. And like I said, anyone who didn't play Nier Automata, it's probably not going to bother you, but I did play Nier Automata, and it is very special. If you're going to go to that place, then you better be able to wrap your arms around all that stuff. Shift Up does not have the wingspan required. They clearly are very inspired by Yoko Taro's work, and they have such reverence for what he's created, but they are not a fraction of the storyteller he is, and they would have been much better served to have used Nier Automata as a muse rather than as a template. There is no denying that alongside this disappointing mimicry is a very solid video game that sometimes has flourishes of greatness. The open world design is simple, but it does engender and reward curiosity. The broad range of game systems on offer mean that things always feel well-paced and diverse. The technical and user experience polish shows just how much work Shift Up have put into this and how talented they are as developers. That's best shown, however, by these survival horror style missions and this excellent combat and these fantastic boss encounters. You don't get to make this stuff by accident. Like, if you can pull off that stuff, you are in a pretty small club, and Shift Up are absolutely in that club, which is why I'm really keen for Shift Up's next game. Like, if they needed to make this game to get Nier Automata out of their system, then that's done now. Now they can let Yoko Taro make Nier games, and they can make their own thing. Stellar Blade proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Shift Up know how to make a good video game, and if they're willing to move beyond the confines of their own starry-eyed Nier adulation, I think they'd end up making a really great video game. I look forward to that, but for now I do think there's enough here in Stellar Blade to enjoy, and so I recommend it to you. Alright, we all know the big phone manufacturers and they're doing their thing, but there's one company that's been working their ass off to develop the best gaming phone on the market, and that's this video's sponsor, Red Magic. For multiple generations of hardware, Red Magic have been perfecting the art of the gaming phone, delivering things like a screen that is smooth and bright, battery life that goes the distance, ergonomics that put gameplay at the center of the experience rather than being an afterthought, and performance that runs rings around the competition, supported by a cooling system that keeps your device running cool even under intense loads. All of those generations of work culminate here in the Red Magic 9 Pro, the single best smartphone on the market if playing games is your goal. That's not just marketing spin, by the way. way, please go and check out reviews for this thing, and you will absolutely see how much positive sentiment the Red Magic 9 Pro has garnered, and how impressively it stacks up against other phones on the market. The core of the Red Magic 9 Pro is its Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 processor, delivering a 32% increase in CPU performance and a 34% increase in GPU performance, while also significantly reducing power consumption. This makes the Red Magic 9 Pro an absolute powerhouse, able to run anything you throw at it with ease, including more demanding emulation if that's your thing. It features a 6500 mAh battery, which is nuts. That'll easily go the entire day without needing to charge, and will actually give you up to 56 hours of standby without needing to charge it. And I can personally attest to that, because I put it by my bedside and didn't use it for like a day and a bit, and then when I came back, it still had like over half battery, and I was just like, that is insane. Any other phone I've used doesn't even come close to that. The ICE 13 cooling system uses an actual fan inside the phone to suck in air from one side and push it out the other. It's really quiet, but it's really powerful, because the biggest thing that causes performance loss when playing on mobile is your device overheating, with the CPU needing to reduce load to manage that. With lower temps comes better performance, and that's exactly what the Red Magic 9 Pro is built for. It features highly responsive, remappable 520Hz frequency shoulder buttons, allowing you to use your index fingers during gameplay, perfect for shooters, action games, or racing titles. There's also the Game Space Center, a user experience that you can toggle on and off, and it basically converts your phone into a games console, making it easy to load up your favorite titles, adjust game-specific settings, and so much more. For me personally, I do a fair amount of gaming on my mobile, between experiences like Marvel Snap, Wild Rift, and Crash Royale, as well as ports of some of my favorite indies like Dead Cells or Papers, Please. Mobile can be a really great place to play games, and if you want to have the absolute best phone for playing games, then this is it. The Red Magic 9 Pro. It comes in a range of different colors and configurations, and right now Red Magic are actually doing a special 6th anniversary sale that runs until the 9th of May, where they're doing heaps of giveaways and stuff, so click below to check that out, or just visit their socials. Big thank you to Red Magic for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching.